Welcome, dear listener, to Candlelight Mysteries, where every whisper hides a truth and every shadow conceals a secret. Tonight, we bring you the man who claimed to be Miss Marple's nephew, a tale from the quiet lanes and rose-covered cottages of St. Mary Mead. The air carries the calm scent of afternoon tea and the unspoken weight of curiosity. Within this gentle village, the smallest act is seldom without meaning, and a stranger's smile may hold a story untold. Miss Marple, that serene and silver-haired observer of human folly, sits among her roses and her memories. She knows that deceit often begins with politeness and ends in revelation. Her knitting needles move softly as thought itself, tracing patterns that mirror the mysteries of the heart. Settle now, dear listener, as we draw close to the hearth where truth and imagination meet. The candle burns low, and secrets are ready to stir. Chapter 1. The clock above the counter at the Blue Rose Tea Room struck 4. Afternoon light poured through lace curtains, glinting off polished teapots and sugar bowls. Miss Marple sat near the window, knitting a soft grey muffler with measured calm. Around her, voices mingled in quiet harmony, like bees in a late summer garden. Mrs. Bantry sipped her tea and watched her friend with fond amusement.
"I do believe, Jane, that you have eyes sharper than any policeman," she said. Miss Marple smiled gently.
"One learns a great deal from the way people stir their tea, my dear." Just then, the door opened with a soft ring. A young man entered, his suit well cut, his hair neatly brushed. He paused, looked about, and then walked toward Miss Marple's table. "Excuse me?" he said, smiling pleasantly.
"You must be my Aunt Jane," Mrs. Bantry gasped softly.
Miss Marple's needles paused in mid-air. "Indeed?" she asked. The young man sat down before he was invited, his confidence smooth and untroubled. "I am Timothy Reed, your sister's son," he said.
"I have only just returned from abroad." Mrs. Bartlett behind the counter turned her head with interest.
Conversation in the room thinned like a whisper caught by wind. Miss Marple regarded the stranger with mild curiosity. "My sister?" she asked.
"Ah, yes, dear Lavinia."
"How very odd."
"I had not thought her married," he laughed softly.
"A family story, perhaps," he said. "My mother was rather private." Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed," she said, and her eyes moved to the faint ink stain on his cuff, a clue, small but telling. It spoke of haste, not habit. She folded her knitting and smiled.
"Then we must get to know one another properly." Mrs. Bantry looked both alarmed and delighted.
"Jane, my dear, I never knew you had another nephew." "Nor did I," Miss Marple said softly. Later, as the tea-room emptied, Miss Marple lingered a moment. Mr. Reed's charm was polite, but slightly rehearsed. His manner had the grace of someone accustomed to convincing others. She paid her bill, thanked Mrs. Bartlett, and stepped out into the warm afternoon. The flowers along the lane nodded gently in the breeze. Behind her, the tea-room door closed with a soft click as she walked home. She thought of the stranger's eyes, kind, yes, but watchful, as though measuring the value of every glance. A clue rested in her mind, like a dropped stitch. She would pick it up later. That evening, from her garden gate, Miss Hartnell called out, "Who was the fine young man at the tea-room, Miss Marple?" "Oh, only a supposed relation," Miss Marple said with a quiet smile, "though I confess I had not been told of him before today." Miss Hartnell nodded knowingly. "Well, these young men come and go," she said. "Yes," Miss Marple murmured. "And sometimes they come with a purpose." She went indoors, placed her knitting beside the lamp, and poured herself a modest cup of cocoa. Outside, the night settled softly over St. Mary Mead. The next morning brought a cool breeze and the faint scent of honeysuckle. Miss Marple, seated at her breakfast table, read her post with steady eyes. Nothing remarkable. An invitation to tea, a parish notice, and a letter from a distant cousin in Devon. Her thoughts, however, lingered on Mr. Timothy Reed. At 10 o'clock, Mrs. Bantry arrived unannounced.
"Jane, the whole village is talking," she said.
A nephew appearing out of nowhere.
"How thrilling."
Miss Marple poured her friend some tea. "People do like something to talk about," she said mildly. I dare say Colonel Melchett will want to know more, Mrs. Bantry continued.
Men like that cannot resist a mystery, Miss Marple smiled.
Neither, I suspect, can women. Later that day she walked to the post office. Along the way she met the vicar, who tipped his hat.
A new face in the village, I hear, he said. Yes, she replied.
One claiming a connection to me, said the vicar. Family is such a comforting illusion. Miss Marple smiled again, though her eyes were thoughtful. By afternoon she took tea alone in her garden. The roses were in full bloom. A thrush sang from the hedge. All appeared peaceful, yet something felt slightly out of place, like a picture hanging just a touch crooked. At 3:30, a shadow fell across the garden gate. Mr. Reed stood there, holding a small bouquet. I hope I'm not intruding, he said. Not at all, Miss Marple replied.
Do come in. He handed her the flowers.
I thought these might brighten your table, he said. Very kind, she said, placing them in a small vase. You are settling well, I trust? He nodded. I've taken a room at Mrs. Bartlett's. She tells me you are something of a legend in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple smiled. One must find something to occupy one's time, she said. A small clue surfaced as she poured tea. His gaze moved to her mantel, where a framed photograph of her real nephew stood. He noted it carefully, as though comparing faces. They spoke of simple things, the weather, the quietness of village life, the small pleasures of a good garden. Yet, every few minutes, his eyes drifted again to that photograph. When he rose to leave, Miss Marple offered him a slice of sponge cake. Do visit again, she said. I shall, he promised. Family ought not to be strangers. As the gate clicked behind him, Miss Marple watched through the lace curtain. His walk was brisk, yet he glanced twice over his shoulder. She returned to her chair, knitting once more. Her needles moved slowly, rhythmically, while her mind assembled each detail, the cuff stain, the bouquet, the careful lies. Outside, the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the air grew still. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Family indeed, she whispered. Chapter 2. The morning broke soft and golden over St. Mary Mead. Dew lay upon the hedges and the scent of lilac drifted through open windows. Miss Marple, dressed neatly in pale blue, was pruning her roses with quiet care. Each petal seemed a small treasure, each thorn a lesson in patience. She was thinking of Timothy Reed, the supposed nephew, and the smooth ease with which he had appeared. A stranger who claimed kinship was no new thing in life, but rarely without reason. As she tied a fresh rose to its stake, she heard the crunch of gravel upon the path. Looking up, she saw Mr. Reed himself coming through the gate, his manner easy and confident, his smile as polished as ever. Good morning, Aunt Jane, he called cheerfully. Miss Marple inclined her head. Good morning, Mr. Reed. You are up early. I could not resist a walk through the village, he said. It's quite the picture of charm. He held out a small bouquet of daisies and pinks. A token of affection for my dear aunt. Miss Marple accepted them politely.
How thoughtful of you. He looked around her garden with admiration.
You must spend hours tending this place, he said. One must keep busy, she replied.
Idleness is the seed of trouble, he laughed.
Quite right. I imagine you know everyone here. I try to, she said. It is easier to help people when one understands their nature. A small clue appeared in his words, a faint impatience beneath the charm. He was probing, measuring, seeking. His eyes moved toward the small summer house at the back of the garden, where a writing desk stood by the window. Your garden must hold many secrets, he said. Only weeds and memories, she replied. Miss Hartnell appeared at the hedge, her hat slightly askew. Morning, Miss Marple, she called. I see you have company. Indeed, Miss Marple answered. My nephew's paying a call. Miss Hartnell sniffed. Nephew, you say?
I did not know you had one. Neither did I until yesterday, Miss Marple said lightly. Mr. Reed smiled with practised ease.
Families can be full of surprises. Quite, Miss Hartnell said, eyeing him suspiciously. Well, enjoy your visit. When she was gone, Mr. Reed chuckled softly. You are famous already.
People here do love a bit of curiosity. They do, Miss Marple said.
Though curiosity can sometimes protect more than it harms, she motioned him toward the summer house. "Would you care for tea?" He accepted at once. As she poured, her eyes caught a glimpse of his cuff again, still faintly stained, though he had tried to scrub it clean.
A small clue indeed, but she noted it. He asked many questions about her life, her acquaintances, and, most of all, about her family.
His tone was casual, but the direction of his curiosity was not. "I had thought," he said thoughtfully, "that you were quite alone here. No living relatives, perhaps?" Miss Marple smiled. "People are seldom as alone as they appear." He laughed again, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. As they spoke, a faint breeze stirred the lace curtain behind them. On her writing desk lay a small silver frame containing a photograph of her late cousin, a woman once involved in a long-forgotten inheritance matter. Mr. Reed's gaze rested on it for too long. When he finally took his leave, he bowed lightly and promised to call again. "There is so much I would like to learn about the family," he said. Miss Marple watched him go, the scent of his cologne lingering faintly in the air. A robin landed on the gate-post. She smiled at it, her eyes thoughtful. "He means to learn a great deal," she murmured. "And perhaps he already knows too much." That afternoon, the village green was alive with talk. Mrs. Bantry had stopped by the post office, and within an hour, everyone knew that Miss Marple's nephew had brought her flowers. By the time Colonel Melchett heard the tale, it had grown to include a possible inheritance, a secret will, and a London solicitor. Miss Marple, meanwhile, sat quietly with her knitting beside the window. She knew the rhythm of gossip in St. Mary Mead as well as the ticking of her clock. It served its own purpose. It stirred the pond so the truth might float to the top. At 4 o'clock, there came a gentle knock on her door. She opened it to find Inspector Cray of Melchester standing there, hat in hand. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he said. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she said. "Do come in. You are always welcome." He entered with his usual grave politeness.
"Small matter, ma'am. A man fitting the description of your visitor has been asking questions about an estate matter connected to an old London firm. Hollis and Finch." Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment. "How very interesting," she said. Cray nodded.
He called himself Reed, though his manner was that of someone with an agenda. "I thought it best to inquire discreetly." "You are wise to do so," she said.
"In small places the most innocent face may wear a mask." He smiled faintly.
"You have said that before, Miss Marple, and it continues to be true," she replied. After he left, she sat still for a long while, watching the light fade across her garden. The flowers glowed pale and ghostly in the twilight. She rose, went to her writing desk, and opened a small notebook bound in brown leather. Inside, her tidy handwriting filled the pages, observations of manner, tone, and phrase. She added a new line beneath the last entry, Mr. Reed. "Charm deliberate, motive concealed. Knowledge of Hollis and Finch suggests prior link to legal inheritance." She closed the book gently. That evening, Mrs. Bantry telephoned. "Jane, my dear, I must ask, do you think he truly is your nephew?" Miss Marple smiled into the receiver. "One must never assume blood makes family, my dear."
"Character tells a truer story." She replaced the receiver and looked once more out the window.
The lane lay quiet, the moon low behind the trees. Somewhere in that calm darkness, the young man walked with secrets yet unspoken. Miss Marple picked up her knitting again. Each stitch fell neatly in place like thought itself, patient, deliberate, and inevitable. Chapter 3. The sun rose bright and clear over St. Mary Mead, painting the rooftops gold. Morning bells chimed across the village, mingling with the clatter of milk bottles and the hum of voices. At the edge of the green, Mrs. Bantry and Mrs. Price Ridley sat upon the bench near the duck pond, each armed with a basket and an eager mind. The ducks floated serenely, unaware of the words darting faster than any ripple. "Well," said Mrs. Price Ridley, "I hear the young man calls himself Miss Marple's nephew." "So he does," replied Mrs. Bantry. "But Jane seems remarkably calm about it, which to my mind is suspicious in itself." Mrs. Bartlett, passing with a tray of buns from her tea-room, paused at once. They say he's from London, she said. Polite, charming, and altogether too confident. London? Cried Mrs. Price Ridley. Nothing good ever comes out of London, except the shops. The laughter carried across the green to where Colonel Melchett stood near the post office, speaking with Reverend Clement. You know, said the Colonel, if there's a mystery to be found in this village, Jane Marple is certain to be at the centre of it. The vicar smiled.
Not by choice, I assure you.
Trouble merely finds her as dust finds sunlight. Miss Marple herself came walking toward them a few minutes later, basket in hand and bonnet tied neatly. She greeted each villager with quiet civility, her step unhurried, her eyes bright and observant. "Good morning, Miss Marple," said Mrs. Bantry, all sweetness. "Your nephew has set quite the stir among us," Miss Marple smiled. "Indeed?"
"I had not noticed." "Oh, but everyone's talking," Mrs. Price Ridley added.
"He's very handsome, though that's never a guarantee of character." Miss Marple inclined her head.
"No, beauty is rarely a reliable guide."
"I find behaviour a far steadier one." Mrs. Bantry leaned closer.
"You don't mean to say you doubt him?"
"Doubt," Miss Marple said softly, "is simply patience waiting for evidence." At that, the women exchanged glances. The ducks flapped and settled again. The moment passed, but the conversation drifted on, spreading through the village like smoke from a slow fire. By noon, even the grocer knew of the mysterious nephew. And by tea-time, speculation had turned to inheritance, scandal, and secret lineage. Each story grew a little bolder, a little farther from truth, yet each carried some kernel that rang faintly true. That evening, as Miss Marple walked home, she stopped by the vicarage gate. "Reverend Clement waved her inside, my dear Miss Marple," he said warmly. "Do sit down."
"I gather your nephew is the talk of the parish." "So I understand," she replied, folding her gloves.
"It is curious how swiftly stories multiply when facts are scarce." "Indeed," said the vicar. "Perhaps that is how faith began." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Or folly," she said. A small clue glimmered as they spoke. The vicar mentioned that the stranger had asked about an old family estate, once belonging to the late Mrs. Templeton, an estate that vanished into legal dispute 20 years earlier. "Mrs. Templeton," Miss Marple repeated softly. "A name I have not heard in many years." "Yes," said the vicar. "Her heir never claimed the inheritance. Some say the family line ended. Or perhaps," said Miss Marple, "it only went wandering." She thanked the vicar, rose, and left quietly, her mind alive with thought. The evening sky was soft with peach and violet. Along the path she saw Mr. Reed ahead, speaking to Mrs. Bartlett by her shop door. He handed her an envelope, then walked briskly toward the inn. Miss Marple slowed her pace. The envelope bore the neat fold of a solicitor's letter, crisp and deliberate. She smiled slightly to herself.
"Curious," she murmured, "how kindness and inquiry often wear the same face."
The next morning brought a whisper of rain and a fresh round of gossip. The Blue Rose tea room was crowded once more, and every table seemed to hum with talk of the mysterious nephew. Mrs. Bartlett moved briskly between tables, carrying teapots and smiles. "It's remarkable," she said to Mrs. Bantry, "how much excitement one visitor can bring to a quiet place." "Excitement is all very well," Mrs. Bantry replied, "but I prefer mine without the risk of crime." At the far end of the room, Miss Marple sat quietly, her tea untouched, her gaze soft but unwavering. From her corner she could hear fragments of talk, mentions of wills, of hidden heirs, of London solicitors and family scandals. Mr. Reed entered just as the clock struck 3. He greeted everyone warmly, though his eyes sought Miss Marple first. "Aunt Jane," he said, bowing slightly. "Might I join you?" "Of course," she said. He sat, folded his gloves neatly and smiled. "I hope the village is being kind to you." "It is never unkind," she replied, "although it does enjoy a good story." He laughed softly. "So I've noticed."
"I'm told my parentage has already been discussed by half of St. Mary Mead." "Indeed," Miss Marple said.
"You have achieved more fame in 2 days than I have in 20 years. A small clue came then. His laughter rang true but ended too soon, replaced by a watchful stillness. He was calculating how much she knew. "I suppose I must be careful what I say," he said lightly. "Truth requires less care than invention," she replied. At that, he met her eyes, and for the first time his expression faltered. Before he could reply, Mrs. Bartlett approached with a note in her hand. "Mr. Reed," she said, "this was delivered for you by a messenger from Melchester." He thanked her, took the envelope, and frowned slightly at the seal. Miss Marple watched the movement of his hands, the way he turned the paper twice before tucking it swiftly into his pocket. A practiced gesture meant to conceal reaction. "Business," he said smoothly. "Nothing important?" "Ah," said Miss Marple. "The unimportant matters are often the most revealing." He smiled, but his composure wavered. Within a few minutes he rose to leave. When he had gone, Mrs. Bantry joined Miss Marple. "He looked rather pale," she said. "Perhaps," Miss Marple answered, "because truth is a draught. Few can swallow comfortably." That evening, as the rain settled and the lamps were lit, Miss Marple sat once more by her window, knitting quietly. She had gathered her small clues, the ink-stained cuff, the solicitor's letter, the curiosity about inheritance. A picture was forming, faint but discernible, like the outline of a face beneath water. She looked toward the garden, where shadows moved softly in the lamplight. Somewhere, she knew, lay the reason for the stranger's visit. Her needles clicked softly in the stillness.
"Patience," she whispered.
"It will show itself soon enough." Chapter 4. The rain began just after dusk, soft and persistent, drumming upon cottage roofs and glistening along the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead. Within her sitting-room, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the glow flickering across her gentle face as she knitted a plain grey scarf. The room was filled with the quiet rhythm of comfort, the tick of the clock, the sigh of wind through the eaves, the crackle of the hearth. She had spent the afternoon reflecting on Mr. Reed's manner. His charm, though carefully worn, had the faint stiffness of rehearsal. It was not natural affection, but studied friendliness. And the letter from Melchester weighed upon her mind like an unopened door. As the church clock struck 9, a soft knock came at the door. Miss Marple looked up. Few called at that hour. She set aside her knitting and rose with measured calm. When she opened the door, Timothy Reed stood there, rain beading on his coat, his hair darkened and damp. His face was pale and strained. "I beg your pardon for calling so late," he said, "but I had nowhere else to turn." Miss Marple regarded him quietly. "Then you had best come in." He stepped inside, glancing about the little sitting-room as if seeking safety in its familiarity. She motioned him to the fire and handed him a towel. "Warm yourself," she said kindly, "and then you may tell me what troubles you." He hesitated, looking down at his hands. "It is not easy to explain. Most things worth hearing seldom are," she said. For a moment, only the fire spoke. Then he drew a breath. "Someone is following me, Miss Marple. I have seen him twice this week, a man in a brown overcoat near the vicarage, and again by the post office tonight."
"He means to harm me." Miss Marple's expression did not change.
"Do you know why he should wish that?" He looked away.
"Perhaps because of something I once did."
"Or something I am thought to have done." She folded her hands. "The difference between the two is often a wide one." He gave a strained laugh. "You think I'm lying?" "I think," she said gently, "that you are frightened."
"And fear clouds even an honest tongue." A faint sound came from outside, a footstep on the wet path, a brief pause, then silence. Reed started.
"You hear it too?" Miss Marple rose and crossed to the curtain. She drew it aside a few inches. The lane beyond lay empty beneath the rain.
Only the lamp at the corner burned faintly through the mist. "No one there," she said.
"Yet perhaps someone waiting beyond the light." He sank back into his chair. "I should not have come," he muttered. "I thought perhaps you could help me, but it was foolish." Miss Marple watched him carefully. His fear was real, yet its cause was deeper than pursuit. It was guilt in disguise. "You came," she said, "because you wished to be believed." He looked up sharply.
"Yes," he whispered. She nodded.
"Then you must begin with truth, however small." Half-truths serve no one for long. For a long time he said nothing. The fire hissed softly as rain slid down the chimney. Then he spoke in a low voice. "I once worked for a solicitor's office in London, Hollis and Finch. There was an inheritance case, old and forgotten, but with money still unsettled. I thought I could find the rightful heir and gain reward. But others had the same idea, and did you find the heir? She asked. He met her eyes. No, but someone believes I did. A small clue settled within her mind, quiet but firm. Hollis and Finch, the same name Inspector Cray had mentioned. You must tell the inspector everything, she said. He shook his head.
I cannot.
It would destroy me. Miss Marple stirred the fire gently. Better a little destruction now than complete ruin later, she said. He looked at her with something like despair. You do not understand. I have lived long enough, she said softly, to understand nearly everything. Outside, thunder murmured across the fields. The rain thickened, pressing against the windows like fingers on glass. She poured him a cup of tea. You will stay until the rain eases. Then you may decide what must be done. He nodded faintly, the tension easing from his shoulders. But his eyes still darted toward the door. Miss Marple, calm and composed, resumed her knitting. Each stitch marked a thought, each loop a quiet deduction forming shape within her mind. The rain continued into the night. The clock struck 10, then past. Timothy Reed dozed lightly in the chair, the firelight playing across his face. Miss Marple, seated opposite, observed him quietly. His rest was not peaceful. Now and then his hand twitched, his brow furrowed. Dreams, perhaps, memories he could not suppress. A soft tap came at the door again. This time it was brisk, official. She rose, opened it a few inches, and found Inspector Cray standing there, his coat glistening with rain. "Good evening, Miss Marple," he said. "Forgive the hour. I was passing through and thought to warn you. We've reason to believe your visitor may be in some trouble." She stepped aside. "And you'd better come in." Cray entered, removed his hat, and saw Reed by the fire.
His expression tightened. "Ah, so he is here."
Reed woke with a start. "Inspector," he said sharply.
"You have no right—" "I have every right," Cray interrupted calmly.
"You have been under quiet watch for some time. The firm of Hollis and Finch reports a theft of documents."
"I trust you know something of that." Reed's face went pale. "I took nothing," he said. "Only copies, notes." Cray's gaze was steady.
"And a false name, perhaps?" Reed turned to Miss Marple.
"I came here for safety. I swear to you I meant no harm." She looked at him kindly.
"Safety cannot come from falsehood, Mr. Reed. You must tell all." For a moment the room held silence, broken only by rain. Then Reed lowered his head. "Very well. The documents concerned the Templeton estate."
"I thought to trace the heir."
"But when I found hints of her, when I realized she still lived, others began to follow me. They meant to take what I had learned." Cray frowned. "The Templeton case again. It seems to haunt this district." Miss Marple nodded. "The late Mrs. Templeton was once a friend of mine. She had a niece who vanished under unfortunate circumstances." "A niece?" Reed said. "Then, yes," Miss Marple said quietly. "The same bloodline you have been seeking." Reed's eyes widened. "Then I was right."
"There is an heir." Cray stepped forward. "And you will tell me everything you know before harm comes to anyone else." Reed looked from one to the other, then sighed.
"Very well. I will come to Melchester tomorrow and give my statement. But tonight, I beg you, let me rest. I have not slept without fear in weeks." Cray hesitated, then nodded. "So be it. But understand, if you run again, there will be no leniency." "I will not run," Reed said softly. When the inspector had gone, Miss Marple stood by the window. The rain had softened, the air clear once more. She turned back to Reed, whose face was drawn but calm. "Truth," she said, "has a curious habit of finding its way home." He gave a weary smile. "Perhaps it will find me too." Miss Marple watched the dying embers of the fire. "If you are honest tomorrow, it may." She resumed her seat and her knitting. The night grew quiet, save for the slow rhythm of needles against wool. Chapter 5. The next morning dawned bright and cool after the long night's rain. St. Mary Mead glistened under the clear sky,
every leaf and stone newly washed.
Miss Marple opened her window and breathed in the soft scent of earth and rose. Peace returned to the village, at least on the surface. At 8:30, Mrs. Bartlett hurried from the Blue Rose tea room, her face flushed with alarm. She knocked at Miss Marple's door before breakfast was quite cleared away. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, "you must come at once. I found something dreadful in the tea-room fireplace." Miss Marple folded her napkin calmly. "Dreadful things, my dear Mrs. Bartlett. are often worth examining before deciding what they are. Lead the way. The fire in the tea room had been lit early, as usual, to take off the morning chill. Among the grey ashes lay a half-burned letter. Only fragments remained, their edges blackened but the centre still legible. Mrs. Bartlett wrung her hands. I swept the hearth as always, and there it was, half hidden. Someone must have put it there after closing last night. Miss Marple knelt, her keen eyes scanning the paper. She saw the remnants of a letterhead in faint blue ink. Hollis and Finch, solicitors. London, a small clue, sharp as a pin. Mrs. Bantry had arrived by now, breathless with curiosity.
Jane, what on earth do you make of it?
Miss Marple held up the largest fragment. The words were smudged but readable. He cannot know the truth about the niece. The inheritance must remain undisclosed. T.R., Mrs. Bantry gasped. T.R., that must be Timothy Reed. Possibly, Miss Marple said softly, or someone who wished us to think so. She placed the fragment on the table and studied the handwriting. The strokes were neat but hurried, as though written in fear. At that moment, Inspector Cray entered. Ah, Miss Marple, Mrs. Bartlett sent for me.
I gather you've made a discovery. She handed him the fragment.
It was in the hearth, Inspector. Someone burned it late last night. He read it carefully, then looked up.
You saw no one leave or enter after dark?
Mrs. Bartlett shook her head. No one, sir.
Only the cat, Cray smiled faintly.
Cats seldom commit forgery. Miss Marple's eyes wandered to the window-sill where a faint trace of soot marked the edge. Someone opened that window, she said. The lock is smudged. Cray examined it. You're right. Entry was made from outside, and perhaps by someone seeking to hide what they feared would be found, she said. Cray nodded. Reed spent the night under watch at the inn.
He could not have been here. Then the hand that burned the letter may belong to another, Miss Marple said.
One who knows what he knows. A silence fell, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Mrs. Bantry leaned close. Jane, you think someone else is involved? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. My dear, in matters of greed, one seldom acts alone. Outside, the church bell tolled the quarter hour. Miss Marple gathered the charred paper carefully into an envelope. I shall keep this safe, Inspector, she said. Well, there is something in the turn of the writing, something familiar. As they left, the faint scent of smoke lingered in the tea-room. The morning sunlight fell on the hearth, where truth had almost turned to ash. By afternoon, the village buzzed once more. Rumour spread that Miss Marple had found evidence of a crime. Though no one knew its nature, Mrs. Price Ridley declared that Miss Marple was aiding the police in tracking an international thief. Mrs. Bantry found this amusing but did not correct her. Miss Marple, meanwhile, sat quietly by her writing desk, studying the salvaged fragments beneath a magnifying glass. The paper bore faint impressions of a lavender scent, a trace often used by ladies of refinement, a clue, delicate but certain. At 3 o'clock, Inspector Cray arrived again. He brought with him a sealed envelope. This was found at the inn, he said. Reed left it in his room before coming to see me. It contains an old photograph. Miss Marple took the photograph and examined it. It showed a young woman standing beside a garden gate, her expression gentle but sad. On the back was written, Catherine Templeton, age 22. She looked up at Cray. The niece, she said softly. He nodded. Reed confessed he traced her as far as Devon, then lost her trail. He claimed she vanished under another name. Perhaps she did not vanish, Miss Marple murmured. Perhaps she changed her world to escape it. Cray looked puzzled.
You think she is still alive?
Miss Marple smiled.
Alive or remembered enough to frighten someone. She
compared the handwriting on the burned letter with an old note she kept from years past, a letter once sent by Catherine Templeton to a friend in St. Mary Mead. The shape of the capital T was
identical. The burned letter
was not written by Reed, she said quietly. It was written by Catherine herself. Cray's brow furrowed. Then she was in St. Mary Mead last night. Or someone burned her letter to conceal it, Miss Marple said. A letter that would reveal her identity. The inspector leaned forward. Then who? Miss Marple's gaze moved to the window. Outside, Mrs. Bartlett was arranging flowers in her shop, her movements quick, nervous. She once worked as a maid for the Templetons, Miss Marple said. Before she opened her tea room, Cray followed her eyes. "You believe she knows something?" "I believe," Miss Marple said softly, "she knows everything." Evening settled gently over the village. Lamps were lit, and the faint scent of roses filled the air. Miss Marple sat once more with her knitting, her thoughts steady and precise. The pieces were aligning: the letter, the photograph, the inheritance, and the frightened young man who had stumbled into her peace. Tomorrow, she thought, would bring answers. But tonight, she allowed herself one quiet moment before truth rose like the morning sun. The fire burned low, and in its glow the charred edges of the letter gleamed faintly, as though reluctant to let go of their secret. Chapter 6. The evening sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the churchyard. The vicarage stood serene among its climbing ivy and old oaks, a haven of civility and order. Reverend Clement had invited a few guests for supper, as he often did when talk of mystery unsettled the village peace. Miss Marple arrived precisely at 7, her knitting bag over one arm, her manner tranquil and composed. Inside, the fire glowed warmly in the sitting room. Mrs. Clement, cheerful and brisk, poured tea with a hand that never trembled, though her curiosity clearly stirred. "Such excitement these days, Miss Marple," she said. "A burned letter, a supposed nephew, and the inspector in and out like a revolving door." "Indeed," Miss Marple said mildly. "One wonders what our small village has done to deserve so much drama." Colonel Melchett, seated near the window, grunted. "If you ask me, the young man's hiding something."
"Read, is it?"
"No one arrives uninvited and claims family without a motive." Mrs. Bantry, fluttering with delight, added, "He's quite handsome, though, and that never bodes well."
"Handsome men are always up to something." Miss Marple smiled faintly.
"So are plain ones on occasion." Laughter lightened the air, though beneath it lay curiosity sharp as pins. Reverend Clement leaned forward.
"Tell us honestly, Miss Marple.
Do you believe his story?"
"I believe he is sincere," she said slowly.
"But sincerity and truth are not always acquainted." A small clue came then, a shadow that crossed the Colonel's face when the name Templeton was mentioned. Miss Marple noted it, though she said nothing. The vicar rang the bell for supper. The dining room smelled of roast beef and thyme, candles flickering gently upon the polished table. Conversation moved from politics to parish gossip, and back again to Read. Inspector Cray arrived midway through the meal, removing his hat with apology. "Forgive my intrusion. I bring news that may concern us all." He waited until everyone was seated. The burned letter from the tea room was written by Catherine Templeton. She was seen near Melchester 3 days ago under the name Mrs. Gray. Gasps circled the table. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly.
"And she lives still?" "Yes," Cray said.
"And I believe she intends to return to St. Mary Mead. Her letter mentioned unfinished matters here." Mrs. Bantry clasped her hands.
"Oh, how romantic!"
"A woman thought lost, returning after all these years. Romance," Miss Marple said softly, "often walks hand in hand with tragedy." The Colonel cleared his throat. "If she's alive, what of Read's story?"
"He claimed to be seeking her." Cray looked grave.
"That may be true. But someone else seeks her too, and not for family reasons." Outside, a breeze stirred the ivy against the window pane. Within, the fire flickered and dimmed. Miss Marple sat back, thoughtful. "The past never dies, Inspector."
"It merely changes its address." After supper, most of the guests departed.
Only Miss Marple, Inspector Cray, and Reverend Clement remained in the quiet vicarage study. The lamplight fell across the inspector's papers, a small stack of correspondence and notes from London. Cray rubbed his temples. "This Templeton matter grows stranger by the hour. The niece disappears, the heir appears, and every clue seems to come from your village hearts." Miss Marple smiled gently. "St. Mary Mead has a talent for collecting sins like pressed flowers. They dry, but they never fade." He looked at her with respect. "You believe Mrs. Bartlett may be connected?"
"I do," she said.
"She once served the Templetons. She would have known Catherine well and perhaps pitied her." "Pity can be a dangerous motive, Inspector." The Reverend frowned. "You think she helped conceal the woman's identity?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied. "Or perhaps she burned the letter to protect someone she loves." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Mrs. Clement opened it, and Timothy Reed stepped in. He looked weary, his expression drawn but determined. "I was told you were here, Miss Marple," he said. "There's something I must confess," Cray stood. "And you've come at the right moment," Reed glanced at him. "You'll want to hear this too." He took a deep breath.
"Catherine Templeton is my sister." Silence fell.
Even the clock seemed to pause between ticks. "She ran away when our father forbade her marriage," he continued. "She changed her name to escape disgrace. When I learned she might inherit, I came not for greed, but to clear her name. I wanted her to claim what was rightfully hers." Cray's gaze softened slightly. "You should have said so earlier." Reed's voice shook. "Would you have believed me?"
"No one has." Miss Marple's eyes glimmered with compassion.
"Truth often sounds most false when it is simplest." He nodded. "Last night, someone left a note under my door at the inn. It said only, 'She knows you're here.' Leave before it's too late." Cray took the paper he offered. The handwriting was fine, delicate, unmistakably feminine. Miss Marple leaned closer.
"Not Catherine's hand. Mrs. Bartlett's again." Cray's jaw tightened. "And she knows where Catherine is." Miss Marple rose. "No doubt she does."
"And she will reveal it, if she feels safe." The Reverend looked alarmed. "Safe from what?" "From guilt," Miss Marple said softly. "For guilt hides behind kindness more often than behind malice." Outside, the church bell tolled 10. The sound drifted through the vicarage like a benediction. Miss Marple gathered her shawl. "I think," she said, "we must pay Mrs. Bartlett a visit at dawn." Cray nodded.
"And if she refuses to speak?"
Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Then her silence will tell us more than her words." The inspector escorted her home through the quiet lane. The moon hung low, lighting the path in silver. When she reached her gate, Miss Marple paused and looked back toward the church tower. "You see, Inspector," she said, "the truth always waits in the same place, just beyond politeness." He nodded slowly. "And you always know where to find it." She smiled. "One learns after a lifetime of listening." Inside her cottage, the lamp still glowed in the window. Her knitting lay folded on the table, the needles crossed like a tiny compass, pointing steadily toward truth. Chapter 7. Dawn came softly to St. Mary Mead. Mist clung to the hedgerows, and the air carried the scent of damp earth. Miss Marple was already awake, her kettle humming quietly upon the stove. She preferred to think best in the early hours when the village slept, and truth, like the sun, began to rise. At precisely 6:30, Inspector Cray arrived at her gate. He looked brisk but weary, the kind of weariness that comes from chasing ghosts through half-remembered stories. "You are early."
"Inspector?" Miss Marple said, stepping out with her shawl wrapped close. "I hardly slept," he admitted.
"If Mrs. Bartlett knows where the woman is, we must speak to her before word spreads." They walked together toward the Blue Rose tea room. The shutters were still drawn, though faint light glowed within. Miss Marple knocked gently, and after a pause, Mrs. Bartlett opened the door. She looked pale, her apron hastily tied, her hands trembling.
"Oh, Miss Marple," she said softly. "I thought you might come. May we come in?"
Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Bartlett hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, you'd best see for yourselves." The tea room smelled faintly of smoke. In the small back kitchen, the hearth was blackened with ash. She pointed to it. It started before dawn.
"A fire in the gardener's shed."
"The constable put it out, but—" Inspector Cray frowned.
"A fire?" "Yes," she whispered. "And something was found inside." They followed her outside.
The shed stood near the edge of the garden, its roof charred, its walls streaked with soot. The constable stood nearby, hat in hand. "In the ashes, sir," he said. "We found this." He held out a small, burnt object wrapped in cloth. Cray opened it carefully. Inside lay a half-charred photograph. Miss Marple leaned closer. The image was faded but clear enough to see two faces, Catherine Templeton and Timothy Reed, much younger, standing before a London house. Reed's arm was around his sister. On the back, faintly legible, were the words, "For when it is safe again." Mrs. Bartlett covered her mouth.
"I tried to protect her," she said.
"I truly did." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand upon her arm. "Tell us everything, my dear." Tears welled in the woman's eyes.
"Catherine came to me 2 nights ago.
She looked so worn, so frightened. She said she meant to meet her brother, to tell him the truth, but someone was watching her. She begged for a place to hide.
I gave her the key to the shed. I thought she'd be safe there. Inspector Cray's voice was low. And last night?
Mrs. Bartlett shook her head. I went out at dawn to bring her tea. The fire was already burning.
I screamed for help, but by the time the constable came, it was too late. A hush fell.
Even the birds seemed to pause their morning song. Miss Marple's gaze moved slowly over the ground. The scattered footprints, the broken latch, the faint trail of ash leading toward the lane. No body was found? She asked. None, said the constable. The fire was too small to destroy one, yet no one was inside. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, and she fled before the fire reached her. A small clue revealed itself then, the faint scent of lavender wax upon the charred remains of the photograph. The same scent as the letter in the tea-room hearth. She was here, Miss Marple murmured, and she is alive. Mrs. Bartlett looked up, hope mingling with fear. You think so? I am certain, Miss Marple said. This fire was no accident. It was a distraction, meant to erase her trace once more. Inspector Cray straightened. Then someone meant to help her vanish again, or to silence her, Miss Marple replied softly, before she could speak. By afternoon, the village was thick with speculation. Some said Catherine Templeton had died in the fire. Others swore she had been spirited away by strangers. The truth, Miss Marple knew, lay somewhere between tragedy and mercy. She and Inspector Cray returned to her cottage to review what remained of the evidence, the fragments of the letter, the photograph, the note Reed had received, and the faint scent of lavender that bound them all. Timothy Reed arrived shortly after. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed by guilt and sleeplessness.
You found her, haven't you?
He asked. Miss Marple regarded him kindly. We have found proof of her presence. Whether she remains near, we do not yet know. He sank into a chair. She must think me part of it, that I betrayed her. Not betrayed, Miss Marple said, merely entangled.
Lies have a way of binding even the innocent. Inspector Cray spread the evidence across the table.
Who would wish her harm, Reed? Who stood to gain from her disappearance? Reed hesitated. Years ago there was a trustee of the Templeton estate, Mr. Hollis himself. He claimed the funds were exhausted, but Catherine once said she had proof he had kept part of it. Cray frowned. Then if she tried to expose him, he'd have reason to silence her. Miss Marple nodded slowly. And reason to follow the man searching for her. Reed looked up sharply. Then the man in the brown overcoat. Yes, she said. He was no thief. He was a messenger. At that moment a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Bartlett entered, pale but calmer. Miss Marple, this was left at the tea-room for you. She handed over a folded sheet of paper. Miss Marple opened it carefully. The handwriting was fine and clear, Catherine's hand. Do not seek me, dear friend.
I have said what needed saying.
Let the truth belong to those who can bear it. Beneath the words lay a faint smear of ash and the faintest trace of lavender scent. She lives, Miss Marple whispered. Cray read the note and sighed. Then she means to vanish for good. Yes, Miss Marple said quietly. And perhaps that is mercy's way. She folded the letter and placed it gently beside the charred photograph. Later that evening, she sat once more by her fire, knitting in silence while the inspector wrote his report. The cottage glowed with the soft warmth of peace regained, yet her thoughts lingered on the faces of those driven by greed and those guided by love. Truth, she murmured, is seldom pure and never simple. But even when covered by ash, it shines. The firelight flickered across her spectacles. Outside, the village lay calm again, its secrets buried just deep enough to rest. And, dear listener, our story drifts onward. Shall we turn the page to the next chapter? Chapter 8. A soft breeze stirred through St. Mary Mead as morning broke. The village seemed once again at ease, its gossip settled into silence, its curiosity gently satisfied. The flowers in Miss Marple's garden glowed beneath the sunlight, their petals glistening with dew. The storm of deceit had passed, and peace, like a patient friend, had returned. Miss Marple stood among her roses, trimming the faded blooms. Each snip of her shears was measured and calm. She found that order, once disturbed, could always be restored with steady hands. Inspector Cray arrived a little after 9. He leaned upon the gate, hat in hand, his expression softened by respect. "It is over, Miss Marple," he said. "We found Mr. Hollis on the morning train to London. He carried forged papers and a passport under another name."
"He'll stand trial," she smiled faintly.
"And justice for once has kept good time," Cray nodded. "We've also confirmed your suspicion. Catherine Templeton was never far. The note you received was delivered by a child from the next parish. She paid him with a gold brooch and asked that he tell no one where he found her." Miss Marple looked out across her garden.
"A wise woman," she said softly.
"Some truths are too fragile to be carried in public view," he sighed. "Do you think she'll return?"
"No," Miss Marple replied.
"She has made her peace in absence. The living have many ways to begin again, and sometimes it must be far from those who remember." A small clue caught her attention then, the faintest print of a woman's shoe upon the garden path, half covered by morning dew. She looked down and smiled, though perhaps she did say farewell after all. Cray followed her gaze. "You mean she came here in the night," Miss Marple said, "left her mark, as gentle as a whisper."
"And took nothing but forgiveness with her." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the steady hum of bees. Cray replaced his hat. "You've done it again, Miss Marple. I don't know how." "Oh, it's quite simple," she said.
"Human nature is much the same in a village as it is in a city."
"One must only observe and wait," he smiled.
"If the constables of Melchester were half as patient, my work would be easier." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Patience is not a habit easily taught, Inspector."
"It comes with years, with knitting," he laughed, tipped his hat, and walked away down the lane. When he was gone, she turned back to her roses.
The world had grown very still again, and the peace of St. Mary Mead returned, like an old hymn remembered after silence. She thought of Timothy Reed then, how he had sought truth and found compassion instead. His last letter, received that morning, had been brief but sincere. "I leave for Canada tonight. Thank you for believing in me when no one else could." Miss Marple folded the letter and placed it beside her teacup.
"A fine young man," she murmured.
"Misguided but fine." The church bells chimed the hour, gentle as memory. The garden shimmered beneath their sound, each bloom a reminder that even among ashes, life persists. That afternoon, Miss Marple walked to the vicarage. The Reverend Clement greeted her warmly, ushering her in for tea. Mrs. Clement had baked a new cake and insisted on cutting a generous slice. "Jane," she said fondly, "you've untangled yet another of our village knots. I don't know how you do it." Miss Marple smiled. "Knots unravel when one knows where to begin pulling, my dear." Colonel Melchett joined them, declaring that he had always suspected the solicitor. Mrs. Bantry, of course, insisted she had known all along. The conversation turned from mystery to flowers, from suspicion to laughter. By evening, Miss Marple returned home. The sun was setting low across the rooftops, washing the village in a golden haze. She paused by her gate, taking in the sight of her garden. Whole again, its order restored. Upon her doorstep lay a small envelope, sealed with lavender wax. Inside was a single pressed rose petal and a note in Catherine Templeton's hand, for kindness, unseen but felt. "You understand what others never could." Miss Marple read it slowly, then placed it within the pages of her Bible, beside another long-forgotten letter. "Rest well, my dear," she whispered. She settled into her chair by the window as twilight deepened. Her knitting lay upon her lap, half-finished but peaceful in its simplicity. Through the open window came the faint scent of honeysuckle and the distant echo of laughter from the green. Her eyes softened as she thought of all that had passed, the
lies, the courage, the sorrow, and the quiet redemption that had followed.
St. Mary Mead was small, yet within its lanes lived the full measure of human nature, its follies, its hopes, and its capacity for forgiveness. As the lamplight flickered low, Miss Marple resumed her knitting. Each motion was steady, rhythmic, and sure. She hummed softly to herself, a tune without name, but full of contentment. Outside, the stars brightened above the quiet cottages. The world, for the moment, was right again. And so, dear listener, our story drifts onward. Shall we turn the page to the next chapter? Candlelight message. And so, dear listener, the man who claimed to be Miss Marple's nephew draws to its quiet close. The candle's flame is steady once more, its light falling softly on truth revealed. In St. Mary Mead, peace returns, and Miss Marple's knitting resumes, each stitch a reflection on the tangled hearts of humankind. Until next time, dear listener, another secret fades by candlelight.